The U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. Export Assistance Centers. Daniel McLaughlin and Charles Sununu will make the presentations.
Good morning. The Office of Domestic Operations of the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service created one-stop shops, U.S. Export Assistance Centers, in a true public-private partnership. We held over 50 public forums throughout the United States, and based on information gleaned from this grassroots approach, created a national network of unprecedented partnerships with the private sector. We adapted our way of doing business to the needs of the American exporting community. U.S. Export Assistance Centers aggressively increase exports of small and medium-sized firms in an entrepreneurial way while shedding traditional government practices. In a hub-and-spoke design encompassing state, local, and private trade partners, we opened 15 regional export assistance centers, hubs, in major cities, and 73 district export assistance centers, spokes, in locations convenient to client firms. Our new concept's value is clearly evidenced by export actions, trade finance transactions, and client satisfaction. Last year, the U.S. Export Assistance Center network achieved 4,868 export actions, a 45% increase from the previous year. Indications are that we may exceed our FY96 goal of 7,990, an ambitious 67% increase. Trade finance transactions traced by partners, SBA, Ex-Im Bank, and city-state trade finance experts supported over $56 million in exports, and we document an astounding increase to $73 million to date in FY96, just from the Small Business Administration. Our most recent quality assurance survey gave us a 92% satisfaction rate. Our strategy of co-locating centrally with partners and integrating federal, state, and local and private export efforts to achieve a common goal represents a radical departure in the delivery of federal services to the business community. We have built a support team for private industry and international, designed for success in international trade. Our partnership concept as an operating dynamic to achieve common goals of federal, non-federal activities can serve as a role model for breaking down these traditional boundaries. We've brought one of our clients to tell you how this process worked for them. Mr. Charlie Sununu, International Sales Manager of Ellicott Machine Corporation of Baltimore, Maryland. Charlie?
Thank you, Dan. And a very happy client I am. Since 1885, Ellicott has been manufacturing dredging equipment in Baltimore. We are a small business with 125 employees and yearly revenues of less than $50 million. The Vietnamese Ministry of Transport invited us to Hanoi to negotiate a contract for new dredging equipment and spare parts. The dredging market in Vietnam had been dominated by our Dutch competitors since our departure from Vietnam in 1975. I made many trips to Hanoi, and we were very close to an agreement. Our competitors got wind of our pending deal. There are no secrets in Vietnam. And they arrived in Hanoi with a Dutch Minister of Transport who promptly offered our client low-cost financing to purchase Dutch dredges. Our deal fell apart in a matter of hours. We were not going to give up without a fight, and I immediately contacted Nasser Abbasi of the U.S. Export Assistance Center in Baltimore, and the response was absolutely incredible. Within 48 hours of my phone call for help, Nasser had Winston Lord, who was negotiating normalizations of relations with the Vietnamese, write a letter of support for our contract and make personal inquiries to the Vietnamese Prime Minister. At the same time, Secretary Pena wrote to the Minister of Transport supporting our contract. This was the first official contact between the two transportation departments since 1975. The State Department at the same time briefed the Vietnamese ambassador in Washington, Mr. Le Van Bang, who immediately fired off a letter of support to the Prime Minister, telling him this is real important, you better check into it. Within 1 week of my SOS to Nasser in Baltimore, the Vietnamese government requested me to return to Hanoi to continue negotiations. Jim Hall and Chris Runkle at the time were the highest ranking U.S. government officials in Vietnam. We didn't have an embassy at that point yet. sat in on our negotiations to keep the pressure on the Vietnamese and keep the process moving. The end result was the first U.S. export of capital equipment to Vietnam since lifting of the embargo. This historic contract was a $12 million export for Ellicott and enabled us to increase our workforce by 10%. Secretary Pena even came to Hanoi to attend our contract signing ceremony. Pena's trip opened new doors for the U.S. to supply Vietnam ships, aircraft, and locomotives worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This new page of history started with one phone call, indeed one-stop shop. The U.S. Export Assistance Center harnessed the vast resources of the U.S. government and gave us a level playing field in which to compete in the world marketplace. Max, I'm a jockey on this in this program. Let me ride home a winner. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Questions? Don McHenry?
I realize that you've introduced the federal component, but could you tell me how this program differs from the programs which states have established over the years?
One of the things that we've tried to do is to integrate all of our programs. We took a very customer-centered approach, and from somebody who, like Charlie, they don't care if they're getting assistance from the public library. It doesn't matter to them. So what we did was we sort of created a seamless approach to trade promotion so that we integrated the state programs, the local programs, the private sector into our centers. So we gave them sort of a seamless approach to trade finance. In a lot of the sort of state programs, one of the things that the state programs do is they have a tendency to cover the companies that aren't quite ready to export. We deal mostly with export-ready firms. But we've integrated our approach. We do trade missions together, and a lot of the states' trade finance programs have become the sort of the local vendors of the export-import bank programs.
Thank you. Antonio and Liam.
What do you do to ensure that small businesses that don't have the wherewithal to compete in the international market, that they know of your program and can access your program?
Sure. 91% of our clients are small businesses. One of the things that we do is that we use this partnership that we've created with the private sector and with state and local governments reaches out to a lot of different areas of where small businesses can interact. In a lot of cases, most of the training for companies that aren't quite ready is done by the Small Business Development Center networks throughout the United States. Once they're completed that process and they're export ready, then they come to us for sort of actual services, and it allows us to interact with over our 200 offices overseas also.
Lynn?
Within the federal government, certain departments are rightfully more client-centered. Agriculture, commerce, that's the way it ought to be. I mean, there's nothing, I happen to think, that's a good plan. So I guess this is obviously the way one ought to work. But could it also not be described as sort of a natural progression within the department to do these combinations? It's supposedly a department driven by business and more used to the policies that business uses rather than innovation. I should tell you, in the 70s, I remember getting help with a company on almost the same issue, and the Commerce Department was terrific. I mean, and obviously you're continuing that tradition. I'm just trying to figure out innovation.
Yeah. I think the big difference is that this program that Charlie just attested to is client-driven and customer-focused. That, I think, is a rather new innovation. It's been a new innovation from my experience in the federal government in sort of 3 years. A lot of times, government isn't that driven by customer programs. It's driven by other policy needs, it's driven by politics, it's driven by programs, and it's driven by money. But I think having this focused directly on him and creating a whole U.S. network behind that, we think that's innovative.
I've been in the international export business for my whole entire professional life. I can tell you, in the old days when I went overseas, the first place you typically would go to would be the U.S. Embassy. Well, I got to tell you that times have changed tremendously, that I've seen firsthand. In the old days, when I went and asked, I need to find some new distributors in Bangladesh, not being in our embassy in Dhaka, you'd give me a phone book, a cup of coffee, and maybe call a cab for me to go and make an appointment. The whole thing has completed, this administration has been absolutely phenomenal in its support, and people aren't just paying lip service to it. They're doing it.
Dick, for the last question.
I think anything that makes access to governmental services easier, especially for smaller businesses, is probably a pretty good idea. But small business has, in many instances, been a euphemism for minority business. I guess my question is there an affirmative action component to this effort, or is it still pretty much a matter of whoever gets there first?
No, there is a minority business program. That's a subset of our large program. We have teams around the United States that work on the needs of getting minority businesses overseas, and it's been very successful too. Also.
Thank you, gentlemen.